on one foundational strategy.
Welcome back to Behind the Article. My name is Chad Sands, and I'm VP of Marketing at Cloudlex and editor of the Trial Lawyers Journal. Today, I am excited to welcome back Stacey Brown Randall, author of her new book, The Referable Client Experience. Stacey was a contributor to TLJ #1, and she has spent years helping professional service firms, including law firms, build businesses that grow through referrals, not through asking, chasing, or shady online fraudulent tactics. So Stacey, welcome to Behind the Article, and thanks again for contributing to the Trial Lawyers Journal.
Well, thanks, Chad, for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yes. So let's get into it. Your first book and the article that you wrote in TLJ #1 was kind of framed around this idea of generating referrals without asking. In the article in TLJ, you wrote about referrals and marketing and prospecting. You wrote, "Yet we do not want to ask. We do not enjoy it. We know it makes who we are asking uncomfortable, and we also know it does not work." You wrote kind of that statement about, asking for referrals and how painful it is. This new book, The Referable Client Experience, you talk about this kind of idea about the client experience, and you talk about these different client stages. You talk about referral hot zones and referral seeds. What does this new book bring that the first book didn't really touch on?
Yeah, that's such an important first question. And it's one I think when I give my answer, people are somewhat surprised about. So I believe that there are three main plans that every business should be executing on. So every firm should be executing on when it comes to referrals. And they're what we call our foundational strategies. So our foundational plans. One is if you have people referring you now, you need a plan for how you cultivate more referrals from them. We call those folks our existing referral sources. That's actually what book #1 is based on.
Okay.
Another one of our foundational plans of the three, the second one is the client experience, right? And understanding what it looks like to have that referable client experience, and then also to know how to bridge the gap to receive referrals. So that's the second plan that should be running in your business. And that's what the second book is on. Clearly, with book #2, I got better at titling it based on what the book was actually about. So a lot of people think, the first book, because of its general title, Generating Business Referrals Without Asking, it's about like the overall everything. It's actually just based on one foundational strategy. And then the third book has not been written, but the third plan is the potential referral sources. It's the people, those attorneys, clients, other centers of influence that you wish would refer that have never actually referred. How do you get them to start referring you without having to ask them to do it?
Okay, so it is a trilogy, though. I sense there will be maybe a third book coming down in the future to kind of tie it all together.
I keep saying that so that I can will it into life and I can make it true. But writing a book is, it's not that much fun, to be honest, and it's a lot of work. So I got to get myself ready for it.
That's right. In time, maybe. I did have a question for you, and maybe you could tell the story that you did have a business and it failed, and that was kind of the catalyst for this whole journey for you. Can you tell that story about what that business was and the reality that you faced and how you eventually embarked into what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I had a human resource consulting firm. So I worked with large companies, think like KPMG or BDO, like large firms, in terms of helping them understand like generational diversity and employee engagement. Those were the two areas I was specialized in. And I ran that business for a little less than 5 years, did not make it to the 5-year mark. And it was a constant hustle. And it was the type of hustle where, when you start, I think about when an attorney starts a law firm, right? There's that initial hustle that happens, and that's normal in your first year. The problem was I was still in that hustle mode 4 years later. And you've got to have some better processes and systems and things in place for a business to survive. And for me, the feast or famine always came down to the pipeline. It always came down to, did I have clients in the pipeline or not? And so when that business finally failed, And I looked back and I was like, wow, I worked with some great companies, but there wasn't any sustainability to how I brought in new clients. I realized I didn't get any referrals. And I was like, wait, people loved me. They gave me great testimonials. They said they loved working with me. Sometimes they even came back and worked with me again. I was like, but I never got any referrals from that. And I went back to when the business failed. We're a 2-income family. So I went back to corporate America, got a job, and kind of paid attention to what I was doing wrong. I had a chance about 13, 14 months later to start. It was 15 months later to start this business I'm in now. We'll hit 13 years coming up pretty soon. And I had the opportunity to start the business. And I was like, we got to do referrals different. And so I didn't start a business to be an expert in referrals and to teach business owners and firm owners and lawyers and attorneys how to get referrals. I didn't start a business to do that, but I built a business around it was productivity coaching. It's productivity and business coaching. And I use referrals and figuring out the methodology I teach today to be the thing that made that business successful. And when referrals were starting to flow in, I got 112 my first year that I didn't ask for. I realized I'm really onto something. And I had started to teach my clients my strategy. And then over the years, the more you teach it, the more you refine it, the more you realize what's working and stuff. And so now here we are almost 13 years later, and we've got this kind of process, strategy, system, plan, methodology that we teach.
Yeah, I think that just probably resonates with a lot of law firm owners who hang their shingle or go out on their own. Now they're their own business owner and an attorney, and the hustle, as you said, and maybe just not having the systems in place at the beginning to really build success. So speaking of systems, let's start with kind of the fundamental premise of the book, that doing great work does not automatically equal referrals. A little bit what you just kind of told in your own story. For a plaintiff PI attorney who just won a $2 million verdict for a client, that might sound a little counterintuitive.
Yeah. So logically, right, the way most people think about this is logically, it's like, hey, we do great work, right? We win the verdict. We should get referrals. And then they do great work and they do win, maybe not every single verdict, but they win a lot of cases for their clients. And yet they're still wondering, why aren't we getting referrals? And that's because it's based, the belief that if we do great work, we'll get referrals is based on something that doesn't actually exist, right? Because if we all just had to do great work and then we would get referrals, we'd all be drowning in referrals, right? And we do great work. Right? Absolutely. We do great work. So we're like, okay, but wait, I'm not getting referrals. So what am I doing wrong? And I always tell my clients, you're not doing anything wrong. You've just missed a key part of that client experience of doing great work. It is also based on the relationship you're building with your client, and not relationship in terms of like, oh, we go, grab a drink with our clients. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is your client feeling seen through the process. And because the client experience is actually based on how your client feels.
Yes.
So if logically I do great work, I should get referrals. Well, we're dealing with humans and it's based on their emotions and how they feel while they're working with you. And we know that's not necessarily completely logical, right? And so it's understanding that the client experience, the definition of it is how the client feels while working with you and your firm, which is so much more than the verdict or the process. Very important. I'm not negating the importance of the verdict and the importance of the work you do. I'm just saying it's not the only thing. And it's definitely, if that's all you have, I know why you're missing referrals is because you haven't built the other piece to that client experience, like equation, the formula.
As you mentioned, you define the client experience of how the client feels working with you, working with your firm, working with the people at your firm who interact with that client. And for PI firms and their clients, that can sometimes take a very long time in terms of they're uniquely in this emotional state. There's someone very seriously injured, scared, dealing with big insurance companies. Does that emotional kind of intensity that's a little bit different than from, say, like maybe an estate planner? Nothing wrong with estate planning attorneys. Do you think that creates a bigger opportunity for the firm and the attorney to create that very unique, special experience on how they feel? Or do you think it adds more pressure and complicates things?
So it's interesting. I would say that with all the PI firms that I've worked with, they fall into one of two camps. And there's not a right camp or a wrong camp. It's just the way usually the founder or the lead partner has built the firm over time as to their belief system around the client experience. So with some firms, I will find that they don't want to lean heavily into the client experience. They recognize from their purposes, like you said, it's like that emotional state that their clients are in. So they don't lean too heavily into the client experience. They want to do great work. They want to win the case if they can. They want to get the right settlement, right? All the things. They understand they're on this journey with their client for maybe a couple of years, depending on the type of case. And they don't, when it comes to referrals, they don't lean very heavily into generating them from their clients. Mm-hmm. What they will lean into, though, is generating them from others. So what we typically call centers of influence, which other attorneys are going to fall into that bucket, as well as other folks who can refer. Sometimes it's chiropractors, insurance brokers, right? Other folks that can actually refer to BI firms. The other group of firms are going to want to lean into the client experience and are going to want to put things in place. And here's what I always say. There's not a right or wrong, right? Because if you don't want to lean into the client experience, there's other strategies that I teach that support how you want to generate referrals. But for the group that does want to lean into the client experience, right, it's really important that we pay attention to how the client is feeling, but also knowing that the client just needs to feel seen. But as the business owner, what the firm needs you to do is to put in a repeatable process.
Right.
Because if it's not repeatable, you're not going to, first of all, it won't survive 2 clients, right? And all it needs is like one certain case to take 18 months and another one to take 9 days, right? Okay, that's not true, but I'm being overly generalized on purpose for the whole experience to fall apart. So we do put in certain things and I know we're going to dig into it, that we actually are looking at when it comes to leaning into the client experience. But I do want to speak to the folks who are listening to this and are like, I don't know if I want to lean into the clients to get referrals. That's okay. There's other places that we generate referrals from. But if you do have to pay attention. And a lot of this has to do with the type of legal work the firm does.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that matters as well.
You mentioned it, and especially for PI firms, obviously they have their clients, which can be referral sources, and that happens a lot when one of their friends or relatives who gets hurt later on down the line, they call back up. But they also have this other group of referral sources that you talk about, being other attorneys, chiropractors, doctors, et cetera. Should the attorney and law firm create a different client experience for those other attorneys who are referring that is also repeatable and rinsable, repeatable? Is it kind of 2 different customer journeys, but they should build and focus on building that client experience for each referral source?
Yeah. So if you think about it this way, when clients are your client, that's the experience they're getting. And we want to be able to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to bridge the gap to referrals and the client experience. So that is separate because of the uniqueness of the fact that the client is actually a client.
Yeah.
When you think of a center of influence who is another attorney or a chiropractor or a doctor or any of the other types that are going to refer into personal injury firms, those aren't clients. So they're never going to have experience with the client experience, or most of the time they're not, right?
Yep.
And so that experience for them, if they are referring you now, then we have a different plan we would put them through for the existing referral sources. If they're like another attorney you wish would refer, they would go in our potential referral source plan, and the cultivation looks different there because by the nature that they are not a client. So we kind of bucket those out. Now, I'll just mention this because I'm sure you haven't asked the question, but I know it's percolating in the minds of the folks who are paying attention and watching this, is that you also then have, when we think about attorneys specific, right? I see all kinds. Everybody thinks all law firms do it the same way. I'm like, no, they don't. They're very, very different inside. Some will pay attorneys that refer to them, right? There will be the referring attorney fee, right? From that perspective.
Yep.
Some will pay others that aren't attorneys, whether or not they're supposed to or not. They will or won't do it.
Yes.
And others don't refer the attorneys that refer to them, right? And so there is a plan that we build that allows for carve outs based on the folks that are referring to you and the relationship you have with them. Just because we recognize somebody who's being paid to refer to you is motivated a little bit differently than somebody who's referring you.
Yes.
Because they're trying to help someone that has a problem and they're doing it without expecting compensation. So the plans are going to look a little bit different. But for your clients, This is a repeatable process we want in place while the client is your client. That's what this strategy is focused on. We do extend that to the alumni stage when the client's no longer a client. We do extend that from that perspective, but it's really because these people have hired you and have worked with you. And so the referable client experience is specific to the folks who are clients.
Yes. But you do build out maybe just for lack of a better term, it's kind of like a program. Depending on the referral source, they'll experience a different program and type of customer journey or referral journey than your clients will. And that client one is built specifically for the clients.
For example, I'm headed to San Antonio in a couple of weeks to work with a PI law firm. And the plan I'm going to build for them is going to look very, very different from the personal injury law firm that I built for the folks in Florida. And the difference it's going to look similar. Let me say it's not going to look very different as in nothing similar. There's definitely some similarities, but how they approach different relationships and different processes and different rules and stuff will tweak a little bit about what the actual plan ultimately ends up looking like.
In the book, you also kind of talk about the types of work. Can you break down and explain the different types of work when it comes to ongoing work or end date work and hybrid work and how that ties to a referral strategy, especially and that where do kind of PI attorneys and PI firms fall in? I have my own guess, but I'll let you answer after you kind of maybe explain what that is.
One of the ways I want folks thinking about before you can figure out how you're going to build out the referral piece to your client experience is to be very locked and loaded on what your client experience looks like. And the easiest way to understand that is by stages. And before you get to stages, you want to make sure you understand the type of work that you provide to clients. And the type of work, how I define that is, does the work you do have a start date and an end date? And if it does, right, then that's considered end date, which means usually for PI firms, this is like when the case has been won and the settlement check is dispersed, right? And we are done, we've wrapped it up, and their file goes into storage.
Yeah.
But there is also what we refer to as ongoing work. So think about like your CPA. They want to file your taxes and do your tax strategy planning every single year. They don't ever want you to have an end date because that means you're not working with them anymore. So they're ongoing, right? That's more, you can think about it from a retainer perspective, right? But it's ongoing work where they don't want an end date. And so how we build the stages of a client experience has to look different for someone where there is an end date and for someone where there isn't, and they don't want there to be. And then in some companies, there's a hybrid of that. It just means maybe some clients are end date and some clients are ongoing. And that's just to allow for the fact that some businesses run both, and knowing that you've got both pieces, end date type clients and ongoing type clients. Most of the personal injury law firms that I work with fall into end date because the work that they do, the case ends. And so the work is done. Now the client can come back and need them for something else, but that is a repeat client, right? And so the client just starts the client experience again, but it's a repeat client. That's actually the source of where they come from, because the case ended and the file was wrapped up and all the work was done.
Yes. And that's a very unfortunate client because if they come back, they've been seriously injured twice, which is not good news for them.
Right. But most of my attorneys that I work with are like, I mean, of course, we will help that client, but we don't want that client to be in that situation.
Yes. And so I feel like maybe that most PI firms would fall into the end date work, right? As you said, the settlement's just dispersed or, they get the verdict. And then maybe that's where your stages come into play more, because it's not like the attorney or the firm just doesn't care about the client and doesn't do anything to keep that experience going and, stay in contact with them. Could you break down your client stages and how you build that into your framework and how that ties into kind of the types of work?
Yeah, so there's just 3 stages. I have found that the simpler I keep it, the more my clients execute on it. So there probably could be different stages. You could probably look at some layers in between these, and I'm like, there's 3. Like, let's just keep it simple.
Yes.
So everybody, regardless if you're end date, ongoing, or hybrid, you have the new client stage. And that's from the minute the client says yes to working with you, whatever that step they take. They say it internally to themselves first, and then they take some usually type of action. They sign the LOA, they pay the retainer, whatever it is, right? That they're actually hiring you. That's when the new stage starts. Firms get to dictate when the new stage ends, and we move to the second stage, which is what we call the active stage. The active stage is where the majority of work is going to be done. At the end of the active stage, the work is done. And then they move into the alumni stage, which means it's just, we call previous clients or past clients alumni clients because it shifts how we think about our clients when we refer to them as alumni clients versus just past clients. So you can call them past clients, but we call them alumni clients. And that's the third stage. Technically, there's no work being done in that third stage, but as most people recognize, it does have potential for cultivation for referrals if you have the right strategy for how you're going to stay in front of those clients once they become an alumni client.
For me, when I think about a PI firm and I think about the new client stage, that feels a little bit where it's tied into the client intake. Maybe the person's calling into the firm or chatting with the website, and that potentially the active client stage would kick in when they sign and when the attorney and the firm accept the case start. Does that kind of fit in, or do you see it working other ways as well?
Yeah. So usually anything before the client says yes is going to be considered the buyer's journey. So while the client's interacting with your website, right, while the client is maybe having conversations with either like your sales team or someone who is like going to, right. Or if it's an attorney before they've said yes to hiring the attorney, any of that's considered buyer's journey.
Okay.
While they're still making the decision, am I hiring someone and is it going to be you and your firm? Once they say yes, the new stage for some firms can be very fast, right? It's like intake, onboarding, first attorney meeting, boom, now they're out of the new stage and they've moved into the active stage. Typically, I see though with most firms, the active stage doesn't kick in until the attorney's been involved, at least in a first meeting or a first couple of things have actually happened. Because at that point, most of that work really gets going at that point. And the client, right, feels like, okay, I've met the attorney, right? If they didn't meet him in the beginning, right? I've met the attorney and this is who's handling my case and we're off. Right now we're off to do the work. So typically it's going to start once the work has actually, in the client's mind, what it'll look like the work is actually starting. That doesn't mean that's 100% how it looks like behind the scenes. But the way I want you to think about it is like, usually that client with the attorney conversation needs to still be a part of your new stage.
Okay.
That first one.
Yes. And that maybe I'm thinking of it a little bit more early, where you're referring to it as the buyer's journey, where these people might be searching online. They're talking to different law firms, trying to decide which attorney they want to take. In the law firm, that's still maybe technically not that new client stage. That seems
it's not. That's buyer's journey. And it comes before the client experience begins.
Yes, understood. You talk about referral hot zones, specific moments inside the client experience where referrals are most likely to happen. When you think about a PI firm, and again, I think we're talking about specifically clients of the PI firm, right? Or also those potential referral hot zones for the other attorney referral bucket. What do you think some of those hot zones might be for a PI firm and how they can kind of identify them and, as you kind of spell out, use them in their workflow and process?
So I think the one that most firms would probably agree to is that there's probably when like the case is done.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would say most of the time when the case has gone in the favor of the client, right? Maybe not necessarily if it didn't. That there's always that referral hot zone. Like I think a lot of people make the assumption that when the case wraps up, there's that opportunity for a referral hot zone. And what I always tell my firms is, let's not assume. Let's see what your data shows us. And what the data typically shows us, and it just depends on the firm, when I walk them through this process of actually identifying when a client refers you another potential client, where is that client in their own client experience with you? What stage are they in? What has happened? So when a client refers a PNC, right, where are they in their own client experience? That's how you determine your hot zones. And then we look for patterns, not one-offs, right? What I have found that people overlook usually, and so I think people are like, I would say if you're going to take the time to put referral hot zones in place, let's match them, right? Let's map them to the actual referral hot zones you have, because it'll make them work so much better and it'll feel more natural for you and your staff if we're mapping them to what's already real in the business.
Right.
Because then we're just layering in language. We're not trying to change a whole process or like bring in something new.
Yeah.
But I will tell you one area that I find that firms miss out on is mapping to a referral hot zone in the new client stage. And sometimes it's not even there's not one, but we want to see if we can introduce one in that new client stage of when the client is like going through something really hard, trying to find confidence in the decision of who they're going to hire. And they have what we call the quiet voice. And it happens in every stage, but it's the loudest in the client's mind in that new client stage. And that is the idea that, yes, it's buyer's remorse, but it is also the anticipation of what is the resolution that is to come and what that's going to look like for them. And so sometimes the simplest things that we can do in those moments are the things that really connect to a referral hot zone. And we're not even trying to plant a referral seed or use language to percolate the idea of a referral. We're just showing up a little bit differently in that from a relationship, like seeing that client differently, that really endears that client to you and your staff and your firm, that allow for referrals to happen. So it's one of the things I always tell folks, it's not like every referral hot zone has to be like, okay, hit them with something referral specific, the language, the referral seeds, the whatever.
Yes.
Sometimes it's the not doing that and doing something that really sees the client where they are that allows for that to become a referral hot zone. So we kind of look at it in both ways. But if we know you're getting a bunch of referrals at a certain stage, literally we want to go in that, right? We want to go into that area, to that zone, and we'll be like, okay, what's happening? And how do we make more referrals happen from the clients who are hitting the same part, the same stage, the same moment, and not referring?
Right. So when you're working with your clients in these firms, you kind of see what their whole operation is and systems, and you can kind of help identify these for them. But I think also maybe the takeaway is that just in general, especially in PI, these quote unquote hot zones aren't necessarily when they get a check. In the book, you have these standard methods and the more complex method. And could you kind of just share that? Because I think that is a really helpful, like hard takeaway that these firms and anyone watching this can go back and sit down and actually do it and, start to recognize where they might have some opportunities.
The activity you're talking about is where clients are actually going in and they're going to dissect where their referral hot zones are. Yes, and in the book, because I know there's all types of humans, I teach like 3 different ways to do that, but we like really hone in on one. And one is what we just call the starter step. It's like, hey, let's just go back and look at the last 10 clients. The last 10 clients that ended up referring, let's go back and figure out where they were in the client experience for when they referred that PNC, right? That potential new client. So we're like, hey, let's just get an idea of our referral hot zones by looking back at the last 10 people. That's going to give you some information, but let's be like, that's all based on the data you put in. It's what we're going to actually get out of it. And then there's also the step of like, people are like, I'm not going to look back. I'm not going to do the data. Right. I get it. It happens. So I'm like, well, then let's start paying attention to it moving forward.
Right.
That's another option. Like start paying attention when clients are referring, add it in whatever system you use, right? However you're calculating and tracking all your data, make a note of like when the client, what stage they were in, what moment was happening when they referred.
Yes.
And just capture it moving forward. The best way to do it, though, is to actually look back over some data, some real data, not the last 10 clients that referred, but maybe look back over a couple of hard data points and really figure out when our clients are referring to us, when is it happening? Because that is going to give you like a really true understanding of that hot zone.
Yes, it's not just like, Jill, who we settled her case, her motor vehicle accident for $500,000 last spring, called because her aunt got injured again. It's really looking more about where Jill was in her client experience with your firm of when that referral happened and really digging in and identifying that. So I will say for PI firms, a lot of it's going to happen in the alumni stage. Yes.
Which means paying attention to the alumni stage matters in a way that most firms kind of just forget about and overlook and don't have a process in place.
Okay, so the book is The Referable Client Experience by Stacey Brown Randall, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I did the Audible, read by Stacey Brown Randall, the Audible version, by the way. Learn more at the referrableclientexperience.com. Connect with Stacey at stacybrownrandall.com. She also hosts the Roadmap to Referrals podcasts. So if you want to keep going, follow Stacey. And this was a fantastic conversation. We have a question. So clients refer to our firm based on case manager staff that provide a good experience, but we have a lot of people touching the file due to volume, right? Makes sense. But not all of our staff do that. Does this work for larger firms?
Yes. So here's what I always tell folks when they're thinking about implementing a strategy to generate more referrals is that implementation happens at two levels. It's going to happen at the firm-wide level where the firm, whether that's through operations, through client intake, through marketing, through business development, is going to control and or be responsible for certain parts of that client experience, and more so of the other types of strategies that I teach. They're not all just the client experience, right? So implementation, execution, who's in charge, who owns it, who are metricing behind it, right? Is metricing a word? I don't know. I'm going to use it as one.
It is now.
It is now.
Yeah.
So some implementation happens at the firm level, and that has to be very specifically broken down and assigned. Then other implementation of this actually happens, execution happens at the individual level, but it's usually based on who controls and owns the relationships. So within a client experience, that may be more firm-wide execution. And so it's making sure that people understand the hot zones and the language and the things we say at this stage within the client experience. And it doesn't matter who's touching it at that moment, they know what to do. But when it comes to actual individual people outside the client experience referring you, other attorneys, right? Other centers of influence referring, that's going to be owned by an individual in the firm. And that has more to do with who owns that relationship. Is it your business development team, right? Is it your account manager team, or is it your attorneys? Okay, so specific attorneys that receive referrals and they own those relationships. We just have to look at who owns what, and then we build out the process around that. Getting it to that level, though, I'll be honest, that's when a firm is working with me one-on-one, where we're able to go to that type of level. You're not going to get that type of level if a firm were to join like my coaching program or something. That's more of our VIP consulting track, because it has to be so specific to the firm.
Yeah. All right. Once again, thanks again, Stacey, for contributing to the Trial Lawyers Journal, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining. See ya.
Thanks for having me.